So again, thank you for coming. First of all, it's a pleasure to come here and be invited to talk about something other than witches, which is where my work has taken me. But I started off as a relatively sensible political and religious historian, so it's nice to get back to some of those roots here. So the Dutch Stranger Church in Great Yarmouth was for a small community of between 28 to 48 residents out of maybe 100 to 200 Dutch speakers in the town. But its importance was an alternative Calvinist community. By 1575, the Dutch presence in the town was large enough that the corporation granted them a room for their congregation in the townhouse, a building at the top of the South Quay. This space was licensed for Dutch Sunday services, but between 1627 and 1632, the corporation attempted to use the space for early morning prayers by the town's Puritan lecturer, a man called John Brinsley, after his dismissal from St. Nicholas's Church, the town's parish church. Brinsley was licensed to preach from the chapel in 1631 by Bishop White, but in 1632 he was barred from the chapel as part of an attempt to curb faction and unrest within the town. The Dutch chapel then provided a space for the town's godly to access a Puritan ministry at a time when Laudian reforms were affecting the town's parish church. It is then this story that we're going to try and explore today. So why Great Yarmouth is so important is that it is a vital North Sea port for fishing and trade. So as you obviously all probably well know, it's located at the confluence of 3 rivers that cross the fertile East Anglian countryside, and is one of the most easterly havens in England, making it a key both to inland and maritime trading networks. Great Yarmouth's merchants had a wide trade network going as far as Ireland, the Baltic, France, Italy, and the American colony of Virginia, as Alan just showed with some of his points there. Great Yarmouth's position on the east coast, opposite Amsterdam, meant it was the most convenient location for trade in the Netherlands and across the North Sea. But trade, as we're going to see, brought with it threats to the town's unity, as the nearby Netherlands was a sanctuary for those seeking refuge for their religious nonconformity, and Great Yarmouth was the closest point of access for those seeking to bring those ideas into England. As you can see there, a sort of wonderful image of a sort of Dutch woman with a herring. So the herring fleet dominated the lives of the majority of Great Yarmouth's residents, employing the fishermen and attendant trades, and additional income for citizens at the yearly herring fair, which very appropriately would begin today on St. Michaelmas, lasting for another 40 days after that. The right to trade the herring was restricted to the town's freemen, but the freemen were allowed to charge for hosting buyers and sellers, providing for them an additional income. The corporation had the right to half-doles and haning from this herring catch. The half-dole was a portion of any catch over 2 lasts, equal to 24 barrels, granted to the corporation. The big issue with this, however, was that the Dutch had become the superior fishermen to the locals and had driven a decline in the herring trade. So the scale of the Dutch fleet dwarfed the English, with 1,000 busses, or rather these very heavily built, three-masted, broad-beamed specialist herring boats out each summer and autumn. These ships could be up to 100 tons for a crew of 10 to 20 men and boys catching and processing herring. However, while this was harmful to the wider fishing trade, the Dutch still benefited Great Yarmouth, bringing their catch to the town's annual herring fair. Then strangers such as the Dutch would pay the haning rate for the right to sell herring in the town. And again, it was the herring, just as it was the material trades that brought the Dutch to Norwich, it was the herring trade that brought the Dutch to settle Great Yarmouth. In 1568, Queen Elizabeth issued a license for 30 named master fishermen to settle in their town with their families to fish and prepare herring, according to the Dutch tradition. So this, again, is shortly after when they were granted their own private chapel. So this chapel then was a vital part of this new community. These people who had left the Netherlands in response to religious intolerance were now granted this space to follow their own beliefs. But the thing is, these beliefs they brought with them were much more reformed than the church in England. So there we go, our image of Great Yarmouth. So obviously the South Quay somewhere down here on the crane there. So the corporation granted the Dutch a room for their congregation in the townhouse. Now the townhouse itself was built in the early 14th century as a merchant's house, which had then been bought by the corporation. This was a prestigious building, equipped with the town's second public clock and located close to the entrance of the haven, the opposite end from the town's parish church. So right over that end, you see St. Nicholas. It had been used as a staple house for wool export, a concert place for the town's musicians, a customs house, and from 1619 onwards, it was also the water bailiff's office. While it lacked the space of St. Nicholas Parish Church, this was more than sufficient for the town's Calvinist Dutchmen. However, the Dutch were not the only Calvinists in Great Yarmouth. So despite reports of a recusant presence in Great Yarmouth in 1618 and the arrest of a Jesuit in the town in 1620, so again, likely people who were more from the southern Netherlands, it was Protestant nonconformists who concerned the corporation during the Caroline period. Great Yarmouth was seen as a bastion of the godly, as dissenting East Anglia looked to Norwich or Little Geneva such as St. Ives or Yarmouth. So the earliest record of nonconformity in the town was a separatist congregation led by a man called Thomas Kane, who was variously described as a Brownist or Anabaptist. Despite the corporation ordering Kane and his followers to conform and arresting those that failed to conform, the presence of Kane's separatists was used part of a subpoena to criticise the town's bailiff in 1625. Now, the official church, being run by the town, was caught. So the town's ministers and lecturers were employed and paid for by the town, but were chosen by the Dean and Chapter of Norwich, something which, of course, the town's corporation contested. So these lecturers were expected to provide Sunday sermons at 9:30 and 2:30 p.m. on our Sunday, and there was a Wednesday lecture at 10 a.m., which required the services of 2 lecturers. The corporation had sought the right to nominate the ministers and remove those they thought as unfitting since Elizabeth's reign, but their nominations were dismissed by the Dean and Chapter of Norwich in 1576, 1582, 1590, 1607, 1619, 1623, 1627, 1632, and 1635, all for being too Puritan. So in 1624, Bishop Harsnett re-established the Dean and Chapter of Norwich's right to the nomination of Great Yarmouth lecturers, which led to a prolonged legal battle that exacerbated the tension between Puritans of the corporation and the conformist ministers they sought to remove. So again, sadly, John Brinsley doesn't have his own portrait, but these are, again, some of the dismissed Puritan ministers of the same kind of generation as Brinsley. So again, we see their very restrained style, limited skull cap, beards, but again, nothing too spectacular. So John Brinsley is the minister who comes to 1625. He was officially minister in the town between 1625 and 1631, and 1642 to 46. 1662. But he was between 1631 and 1642 in nearby Lowndes, leading to a lot of sermon gadding during that period. He was vital to the construction of popular support for Puritanism in Great Yarmouth. So his father, the schoolmaster John Brinsley Sr., was a strict Puritan, according to his student and the future astrologer William Lilly. Brinsley followed his father to Emmanuel College, Cambridge, matriculated in 1615, graduated with BA in 1620, and then an MA in 1623. So Emmanuel is often what was seen as a Calvinist nursery, where Puritans developed lifelong networks and connections. So Brinsley's near contemporaries of Emmanuel included John Harvard and the later Great Yarmouth Congregational minister William Bridge. In 1618, Brinsley served as secretary to his uncle Joseph Hall at the Synod of Dort, again another Dutch connection. After completing his MA, he spent 2 years as a pastor to the Preston family in Essex, near enough to Great Yarmouth for his reputation to reach the town's alderman, leading to his invitation to the town. So Brinsley's orthodox Calvinism in this period was enough to attract the interest of the English Reformed Church in Amsterdam, who sought to recruit him in 1638. So Brinsley is someone who's passed their rigorous screening of potential candidates. So again, showing his belief in his particularly strict Presbyterian sympathies. So Brinsley's acceptability, his popularity and talent in preaching was shown in his sermons, which were published from 1630 onwards. So Brinsley's personal popularity came from remaining in Great Yarmouth during an attack of the plague in the summer of 1625, unlike his rival, the conformist minister Thomas Reeve, who fled the town, possibly sensibly. In the following January, Reeve controversially preached at a parliamentary election against the Puritan candidates. In February, he brought Brinsley before the High Commission at Lambeth, which required the corporation to send a certificate in support of Brinsley to the king. In response, the corporation asked Reeve to leave the town. So there we go with Harsnet. So the members of the corporation were willing to therefore accept a balanced ministry. But as the Dean and Chapter of Norwich and the corporation found each other's choice of minister unbearable, a bitter rivalry emerged. Brinsley had been chosen minister in response to the Dean and Chapter of Norwich imposing the conformist minister Richard Gammon on the town in 1624. However, Bishop Harsnet's campaign to remove ministers not conformable to the discipline and government ecclesiastical within the Church of England, but schismatically and fantastically affecting to the novelties and innovations, brought an end to the corporation's choice of stipendiary clerics like Brinsley. Instead, the more conservative alderman Benjamin Cooper and his allies were willing to pursue a legal case with the Court of Chancery to displace Brinsley from 1626 onwards. In September 1627, the members of the corporation blamed Master Benjamin Cooper's company for Bishop Harsnet's intransigence in trying to remove Brinsley. So the choice of minister had become deeply entwined with the town's internal politics. So the Puritan members of the corporation argued that by supporting Brinsley, they were defending the town's rights and privileges from abuse and abrogation. In the case brought before the Court of Chancery in February 1627, members of the corporation attested they were defending the town's rights against the overweening authority of the Dean and Chapter of Norwich. However, the Dean and Chapter of Norwich accused Brinsley's lecturing of being the means by which people have been distracted into schisms and errors, and the Archbishop Abbot demanded the removal of Brinsley, in part because of alleged Dutch links, prefacing his judgment with remarks about Yarmouth's links to Amsterdam, the importing of schismatical books, and the support which townsmen gave to unconformable ministers and conventicles. Despite the Archbishop's order, the members of the corporation granted Brinsley the right to preach from the town's Dutch chapel, bringing his bag. So again, when the Puritan-hating Samuel Harsnet was translated to York in December 1628, his replacement, Francis White, was more open to restoring Brinsley to the pulpit of St. Nicholas Church. To complete the process, the corporation needed a certificate of conformity from the Dean and Chapter, which George Hardware, again another alderman, refused to sign, and Benjamin Cooper once more brought Brinsley's case before Chancery, who rejected Brinsley's ministry. But then, despite this, we've shown that members of the corporation were willing to make an assertion of authority in local and national conflicts by supporting Brinsley and opposing the Dean and Chapter of Norwich. So then, just as the Dean and Chapter and conformist aldermen sought to quash Brinsley's ministry, the Puritans also used their power on the corporation to suppress ministers they opposed. So Thomas Reeve had criticised Brinsley and preached against Puritanism, we've said that. But the corporation therefore decided to warn Reeve to depart, as the town have taken such dislike of him. When George Barker arrived in 1627 to replace Brinsley, the corporation challenged his right to preach, arguing he was not their lawful minister because he came in by the bishop and dean and chapter, and not by the choice of the people, and a surprisingly democratic view of the minister's role. Barker's imposition was a rejection of the cooperative efforts of magistrates and ministers that defined this Puritan vision of the church government. Barker's alleged illegitimacy was used by members of the corporation to justify withholding his maintenance, and led to the corporation to arrest Barker when he was in the streets for collecting offerings which were due to him. Barker was strangely opposed by many of the bailiffs and others who in their assemblies declaimed against him as a disturber, though without any cause, and threatened him, caused a citation to be served on him in the chancel as he was going to read service. Imagine this, he's in the middle of preaching and he's being disturbed by the locals. The Puritan bailiff, William Bolthole, was remanded by the Dean and Chapter for disrupting Barker's sermon. In May 1630, the Puritan bailiff, Thomas Green, broke down a pulpit door and installed a stranger to preach instead of Barker. And again, I don't know if this is a stranger to someone not supposed to be there, or if this is a stranger in our context, frustratingly. The corporation's attacks on Barker were supported by a campaign of popular libels and slander. Defamatory libels attacked Barker and his friends who took his part, meaning a series of scurrilous rumours taking the form of manuscript crude verse, a tool of Puritan polemicis since the 1570s. So the libels alleged that Barker's children were priest bastards, connecting Barker's conformity to traditional anti-Catholic polemic. So this campaign of intimidation was successful, as Barker was discouraged and forced to leave. Meanwhile, Barker's influence on Great Yarmouth Meanwhile, Brinsley's influence, too many B's. It gets worse with Bridge. Meanwhile, Brinsley's influence on Great Yarmouth did not wane following his arrival in Great Yarmouth, despite the orders of the Dean and Chapter that restricted his preaching to the Dutch chapel. Since again, he continues to have the corporation's support, and his replacement had left due to this local hostility. However, this situation, this status quo, was upset by the arrival of the conformist minister Matthew Brooks in late 1630. Where previous conformist ministers have been unwilling to stay long in the town, Brooks doggedly remained in Great Yarmouth and used his connections to the Dean and Chapter of Norwich to remove Brinsley and the fiery Puritan George Burdett from the pulpit. Again, sadly, I haven't got time to talk about Burdett today, but he's fascinating. Brooks' combative resistance to Puritan ministers and the corporation's attempts to overthrow him intensified the religious polarization that had undermined the possibility of cooperation. The promotion of conformist doctrine by the Privy Council and Norwich's Dean and Chapter was part of Charles I's Protestant counter-reformation felt across the country. However, Law's reforms pulled apart the church and corporations, not just in Great Yarmouth, but also in Newcastle and Exeter, where the corporation sought to defend Puritan ministers and expunge conformist placements. Again, this brings us back to the Dutch chapel. So Brooks proved to be the Puritans' nemesis in Great Yarmouth for over a decade. So again, while he was no Arminian, he's not particularly high church and Laudian's beliefs, he holds orthodox Calvinist beliefs on predestination. He understood ceremony and conformity as matters of obedience to the king. He did not hesitate to enforce the good sports and promote the beautification of St. Nicholas Church. So Brooks's muscular promotion of conformist policies aligned him with the Privy Council, Norwich's Dean and Chapter, and Bishop Wren, the new, more radical bishop in Norwich. Brooks's alliance with the parochial ministry, the episcopate, and the national state threatened the Puritans' reformation of Great Yarmouth. Brooks continually challenged the corporation's attempts to restore Brinsley to the town's pulpit. So, as we said, in 1631, the corporation received a license from the Bishop of Norwich and the permission of the Earl of Dorset to restore Brinsley. So the corporation, in response, immediately removed Brooks' stipend of £10, which may have been a mistake, seeking an agreement to pay Brinsley instead. And the corporation ordered Brinsley to return and start preaching for the following Tuesday in the chapel or Dutch church on the 5th of December. At Brinsley's first sermon on the 9th of December, Brooks resisted Brinsley's return by reading the injunctions from the Bishop of Canterbury that had banned Brinsley from the pulpit while Brinsley was still preaching. But again, a lot of people bursting into churches and disturbing ministries. The leading Puritan councillors, Ezekiel Harris, Thomas Green, Henry Davy, and the recorder Miles Corbett, arrested Brooks for his act of defiance. Brooks responded with a petition supported by the Dean and Chapter of Norwich, John Dassett and Benjamin Cooper, so two of the more conservative councillors and aldermen, which brought Brinsley to the attention of the Privy Council. Now, the Privy Council sided with Brooks, arguing that it was Brinsley's preaching that had caused this dissension within Great Yarmouth. And to restore peace, the council ordered the arrest of those who arrested Brooks, and Brinsley was barred from preaching in the town. The king also ordered that the Dutch chapel should be closed. So Brooks then had proved astute in using the corporation's behaviour to portray them as the cause of dissent, justifying the Privy Council's support for Brooks as a means of reasserting peace. However, that's not quite the end of this Calvinist Dutch connection. So despite his victory, Brooks still faced a challenge from those that aligned themselves with the Dutch. Brooks alleged he'd received a series of violent threats to his life from members of the town's Puritan elite. Amongst them, John Ingram, son of the alderman John Ingram, just to be confusing, declared that if Brooks were in the Dutch chapel, Ingram would have thrown Brooks out of the pulpit and broke his neck. In 1637, Brooks also investigated evidence of the town's connection to nonconformists in the Netherlands, reporting that the searchers had discovered certain seditious books in our port at Yarmouth. So this discovery led to the arrest of the importers. However, Brooks was frustrated that our magistrates would not vouchsafe at all to speak to any or to tell anything of this business. So this led Brooks to become a bit of a sleuth himself, seeking to investigate further by talking to the merchant captain who had imported the books. The captain revealed that he had also brought 2 ministers in his ships in disguised habits who had their entertainment at the house of Master Miles Corbett, Recorder of Yarmouth. So again, we know they disguised themselves as soldiers who were fighting the early talk had mentioned, fighting the Netherlands, this time against the Spanish. So these 2 ministers were Jeremiah Burrows and William Greenhill, both excluded by Bishop Wren for refusing to read the Book of Sports, and who had joined the Rotterdam congregational community. So then, the Dutch connection within Great Yarmouth in 17th century politics can often feel tenuous. The Dutch chapel was not the bustling place of business it had been maybe 50 years before. And in 1646, the corporation allowed the Dutch congregation to excuse itself from the poor rate, since they'd looked after their own poor, and their congregation had been reduced to but a few able men. However, during King Charles I's controversial attempts to impose high church worship, the Dutch chapel stood in for the Dutch Republic's Reformed faith. Just as the Dutch Republic provided a safe space for those too godly for England, so the Dutch chapel played the same role for Great Yarmouth's godly. As the Caroline Church collapsed, it would be William Bridge, an independent later of Rotterdam's English Church, who would help inspire further godly reform in the town. These connections would last into the Restoration. So, thank you very much.
I think we've got some nice little questions for you, Danny. Excellent. Right.
Excellent. I wonder what connection with the Norwich Dutch Church. I know. But my question was, what connections with Dutch Church in Norwich?
As far as I could tell, not much. Again, as we've shown earlier, the Dutch community in Norwich is more focused around merchants. This is obviously more meant to be fishing than fishermen. Again, it's not something I've looked into possibly the depth I should have done compared to others. It's been almost a sideshow of interest to my wider Calvinist topic. But yeah, as far as I can tell, they aren't a particularly interlinked community in quite the same way other merchants would be elsewhere. So Lynn and Norwich, we see.
Danny, can I ask you just a repeat question?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Sorry, it's the online.
Yes.
A bad job.
Is it good?
Yeah, so
You'd like to, but I'll let others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask Danny, what's the source of the sketch of Yarmouth?
That's one that comes from here, because we've used it before on the article I did about herring piracy.
Okay.
So I want to say late 1580s from here, but I can't off the top of my head give you the exact chapter and verse.
Oh, all right. But Gary can do that.
Yes.
Well, I expect a catalogue down. Okay, and this is the question.
Yeah, I wonder if you could just go back to that map, actually, two-part question.
Yes. Oh,
Yarmouth.
too far.
Yes. Whether you can point out either the original Dutch chapel or the later one, so I think it moved to, if you can't, don't worry, but it's a great map of Yarmouth. I haven't seen that before. So is that in the NRO? Where's that from?
It's from the map. As we said before, so the map is from the NRO.
Yeah.
I need to find the source direct name for it, but yes, it's one of the collection, if I remember rightly.
Sorry.
And we sort of know it's likely that the townhouse somewhere around here.
Could you use the pointer on that?
Oh, where's the pointer? Oh, the pointer. Yeah. Oh golly, I'm sorry, I feel quite the Luddite now. So somewhere around here, around the South Quay, says.
I think it's a bit further along.
Yes, it's at the top of the
Opposite the crane.
opposite the crane.
Yeah.
I've now lost the mouse, confusingly. There we go.
Right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Cranes have played an important part in the story today.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I do have a question as well, and I just wondered, and it may be in the letters that I've talked about, that Hessel's published at the end of the 19th century, the Yarmouth Dutch Church letters. But have you found any evidence of what the reaction of the Dutch ministers was to these goings on? People like Johannes Houting, I think, was a minister in Yarmouth.
I've not. Again, looking at the letters, I've not had the chance. So where would you recommend for the collection of the letters?
The letters are in the London Metropolitan Archives. They were published by Johannes Hassels at the end of the 19th century. So that may be a place, and also in relation to what Andrew was asking about, that may be the place to look first. That's probably the most complete record of the reaction. But I just wondered in the English records where that you've been looking at, whether there was any sign of what the Dutch ministers thought about all of this.
So we see very limited influence of the Dutch on the corporation records, apart from going, we don't have enough money, can we pay less tax?
There's certainly that. They're always asking for money. They're just about to run out of money.
Yes.
Yeah.